It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. A Chinese student is convicted of drugging and raping 10 women, both here and in China. Police fear there could be more than 50 other victims. Also tonight, as the United States cuts off intelligence sharing with Ukraine, the French president makes a plea for American support, but prepares for the worst.
I want to believe that the US will stand by our side, but we have to be ready for that not to be the case.
The White House confirms that US officials have held negotiations with Hamas, breaking a long-standing policy not to engage directly with the group. Ready for a trade war or any kind of war, China hits back against Donald Trump's tariffs as a backlash gathers pace in Canada. Plus, a chancellor's headache over economic headroom, how welfare cuts could hold the key for Rachel Reeves in her spring statement. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. A Chinese PhD student who police believe could be one of the UK's most prolific sex offenders was today convicted of the rape of 10 women, both in London and in China. Only 2 of the women have been identified, with 8 yet to be traced. Zhen Haozhou filmed his attacks, with police finding hundreds of hours of footage following his arrest. They believe he may have attacked more than 50 other women and today launched an appeal to find them. Sky's Amelia Harper has our first report and a warning that it contains distressing content.
You Mr. Zhu, by any chance?
At nearly 2 in the morning, police arrive at the flat of this PhD student.
And your surname?
Officers confirm this is Zhen Haozhou, the mechanical engineer turned sexual predator.
Yeah, can you show me your ID, please?
Once inside, we see his unmade bed, the location for his prolific offending.
OK, sir, I'm arresting you on suspicion of rape.
The 28-year-old Chinese national came to the UK in 2017 to study mechanical engineering before beginning a PhD in London a few years later. He presented this image of a successful academic to the outside world, but inside he harboured dark sexual fantasies. After nearly 20 hours of deliberation, a jury found him guilty of drugging and raping 10 women between 2019 and 2023. 3 were attacked in London and 7 in China, all, though, appeared to be of Chinese heritage.
Zhou is a clearly dangerous, predatory and cowardly individual who has deceived his way into the lives of his victim survivors and then incapacitated them before committing the most horrendous sexual assaults.
Zhou lived here in southeast London during his PhD. It was while he was a student that he raped his victims, including one inside this building, while she was drunk and unconscious. And it happened here in this bedroom, captured on a camera he'd set up by the bed.
How many videos do you have?
Police investigated after one victim called them.
No comments. How many victims are there?
And the real answer to that
No comments.
was shocking. Police seized cameras and his phone containing videos and pornographic images of 9 of the women he attacked. The judge today labelling him a dangerous and predatory offender for doing so. On his phone, police also found images of a drug with the words "suitable for full-body anaesthetisation" on the packaging, as well as the tranquiliser triazolam. Police also found a box of items in his flat, items belonging to the women. Zhou claimed the sex was consensual. He said he liked rape role play, but some of the jury were in tears as they watched how one of those women begged him to stop. The material so explicit, the jury won't have to do jury service for another 2 decades. Despite the footage, 8 of Zhou's victims remain unidentified. For 7 of them, their horrendous ordeals took place nearly 5,000 miles away, somewhere in China.
We were satisfied that the strength of those videos alone was enough to pursue a prosecution. In respect to the offences that occurred in China, because we were satisfied that Zhu qualified as a UK resident and that the offence of rape exists in China, we were able to authorise those charges as well.
And as Zhou remained silent while police played him back the footage he'd created, one query remains.
After seeing that, is there anything you want to tell me?
Could there be more?
Ultimately, sadly, there's a far greater body of evidence as well, which we're still working our way through, which indicates that certainly as many as 50 other different women may potentially have been victims. If all these do bear out to be potentially serious sexual assaults or rapes, then ultimately this may make Zhou one of the most prolific offenders in the United Kingdom.
This is the face of a man who's now at the heart of the largest current rape investigation in the UK. Officers have launched an appeal to urge anyone who might be a victim of Zhou to come forward. And in the meantime, they continue to look back at the material they've found. The student becomes the studied.
Well, Amelia joins me here in the studio. So the suspicions, as you said, are there that this goes much wider, but this is a very difficult investigation.
It has been incredibly difficult for a number of reasons, particularly due to the number of women involved and just purely being able to identify them. They've only been able to identify, as part of this trial, 2 of his victims, and now they fear that he has a further 50 victims. The Metropolitan Police say they know this, or they suggest that he has more victims due to further footage that they have found on his mobile devices and on the hidden cameras that he had, that they found in his flat, which shows that they suggest he is raping another 50 women, 25 in the UK and 25 they think are based in China. And they've now launched this urgent appeal to try to urge anyone who thinks they might be a victim of him to come forward. Another woman has actually come forward during the course of the trial. We couldn't report that during the trial, but we can now reveal that. For the Metropolitan Police, this is a victim strategy that straddles really half the world, involving Chinese authorities. They will be looking to work with them. They have said that they have been helpful as they look to try to identify any of those 50 victims, but it has been very difficult, and no doubt that will continue to be a challenge. And for the first time ever, their major incident portal that they've opened for people to contact them on has been made available with language translation options as a way to reach out to different communities. They particularly are interested to hear from any women who are part of the Chinese student community that might have known Zhou during the period of his offending. And now, crucially, with this evidence suggesting that he has a further 50 victims, so 60 in total, the Metropolitan Police says that this suggests that he could be one of the most prolific sexual offenders in the UK.
Amelia, thank you. Now, the French President Emmanuel Macron tonight made a plea to the United States to help preserve European security, but said that France and Europe was ready to go it alone if necessary. Mr. Macron also said that he would discuss with European leaders the possibility of extending France's nuclear umbrella over other countries. They're set to meet tomorrow in Brussels, with the Ukrainian president expected to be in attendance. In Washington, the Trump administration confirmed that it had suspended intelligence sharing with Kyiv, having already done the same thing for military aid. Here's our international correspondent, Diana Magnay, reporting from Washington.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
It was a diplomatic horror show.
You don't have the cards right now. You're gambling with World War III.
In this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
Your country's in big trouble. You've done a lot of talking. It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this, I tell you.
Mr. President!
But just a few days on, Volodymyr Zelensky's efforts to make amends appear to be paying off. Donald Trump reading out the letter he'd received from his Ukrainian counterpart to Congress, clearly pleased by its contents.
We do really value how much America has done to help Ukraine maintain its sovereignty and independence. Regarding the agreement on minerals and security, Ukraine is ready to sign it at any time that is convenient for you. I appreciate that he sent this letter.
Not so appreciative, though, that he was minded to lift his pause on military aid to Ukraine or on all intelligence sharing. A major blow to Ukraine's battlefield capabilities and a major win for Russia. No real clarity either on how long this pause will last.
We have
taken a step back and are pausing and reviewing all aspects of this relationship. But I just got off the phone before I walked out here with my counterpart, the Ukrainian National Security Advisor. We are having good talks on a location for the next round of negotiations, on delegations, on substance.
That may not mean a return to the White House for Volodymyr Zelensky anytime soon, but he will be in Brussels on Thursday to meet with European allies, and his evening address in Kyiv struck a more positive tone.
Today, Ukrainian and American teams began working on an upcoming meeting. Andriy Yermak and Mike Waltz held talks, and we're seeing forward momentum. We hope to see the first results next week.
Europe is scrambling to try and secure more military funding for Ukraine. The French president hosting Hungary's Viktor Orban at the Élysée Palace before giving this sobering message to the French people.
I want to believe that the US will stand by our side, but we have to be ready for that not to be the case. We need to be able to recognise the Russian threat and better defend ourselves in order to deter such attacks.
Europe is waking up fast to the new reality that is Trump's America, where a president flush with power seems to differentiate less and less between friend and foe.
Well, in a moment, we'll speak to our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, in Brussels, and our political correspondent, Rob Powell, in Westminster. But first, Diana Magnay joins me live in Washington. And Diana, military aid pulled or paused, now intelligence sharing too. Is there any way back from this for Ukraine and its European allies?
I think there is, but it just depends how long the Trump administration decides to keep the screws on Volodymyr Zelensky and keep this pause going. It does seem as though there has been a bit of a sea change given the reading out of the letter last night. As you could see in that report, Donald Trump seemed pretty pleased by the whole thing, by Volodymyr Zelensky's change in tone, by the fact that there might be progress now on the minerals deal. But he has clearly been playing hardball by stopping this military aid and the intelligence sharing now. And he will keep dangling it over Ukraine until he gets exactly what he wants. And all of this comes at a great cost to Ukraine, if you think about the fact that it will compromise their ability to operate on the battlefield, to make sure that they're aware in terms of air defences of what incoming Russian missiles are coming and where they're targeting in terms of Ukrainian cities, and also their capacity to strike precision targets deep inside Russia. All of that will be compromised. And all of it benefits Vladimir Putin. And it comes on the back of, in recent days, Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, saying that the United States would stop offensive cyber operations against Russia. That's surely not in America's public interest. The White House also saying that it was looking into easing sanctions in some way. And now this. So it does, therefore, lead Europe especially to say, if we can't rely on the United States to take our side and not Russia's, we're going to have to up our game. And that is what you're seeing now from the French president, and I'm sure of what we'll hear more of in the days to come.
Well, Siobhan, in Brussels, certainly we heard a sombre address from President Macron of France today, ahead of more EU-wide discussions tomorrow.
Yes, I think if anyone is still sitting at home thinking that the threat to Europe is contained in Ukraine, Emmanuel Macron was keen to set them straight. He said that Russia is a threat to France and to Europe, and he underlined that while there's a hot war in Ukraine, there is a daily hybrid war being played out across Europe. So interference in elections, cyber attacks, for example. And he said while he hoped that the US would continue to stand by Europe, that they would be ready to go it alone. So he was gently clapping back at Donald Trump, saying, we want you by our side, but if you're not going to be here, we will survive without you. And this shows that after just 46 days in the White House, that Donald Trump has really forced Europe's hand when it comes to accelerating pledges around defence. So what's France going to do? Well, the president wants to boost their own defence spending, but he also wants to open discussions around extending France's nuclear deterrent to other European nations. You've got to remember that France is the only nuclear power in the EU. And I think the timing of this is really really crucial because it comes at a time of shifting sands in Europe. We've seen another of the EU's big beasts, Germany, change radically its position. So we've seen the likely new Chancellor proposing a massive boost to defence spending there, also underlining his interest in these discussions about extending France's nuclear deterrent. But as you say, it's also crucial because tomorrow there's this crisis meeting of EU members happening here in Brussels. And this is Emmanuel Macron really putting out a rallying cry, a call for unity among that union at a time when they're no longer sure they can rely on their old ally, America.
Siobhan, live for us there in Brussels ahead of that meeting. Thank you. Well, the UK government continues to make a big diplomatic push in Washington. The Defence Secretary, John Healey, is in the US Capitol tonight ahead of a meeting with his counterpart, Pete Hegseth, tomorrow.
Is America abandoning? No, look, I'm very happy to be back in Washington, despite the weather. And we're pulling together here, and we're working hard on a path to peace.
And what are you going to say to your opposite number regarding intelligence sharing tomorrow?
Well, those are discussions for tomorrow, but it's part of a two-day programme, and we're working hard for peace.
Is this the right strategy, do you think, for the US to be withdrawing intelligence from Ukraine?
West Sky's political correspondent Rob Powell is outside the Ministry of Defence for us in Westminster. Rob, so the channels of communication with Washington still very much open on this. Some pointed questions there for the UK Defence Secretary, but what questions will he have for the US Defence Secretary tomorrow?
Yes, Anna, I think the Ministry of Defence and the government's approach to this partly draws on the old saying from one of President Trump's predecessors that there's no limit to the amount of good you can do if you don't care who takes credit. There hasn't really been any crowing, not really any commentating. The focus has really been on action, as they see it anyway, and action largely taken behind the scenes. But the government's trying to face in lots of different directions. On Europe, you heard President Macron tonight saying that there may well be a time when the US is not there for Europe. Contrast that with what Keir Starmer said today to MPs when he said he believed the US still was a reliable ally. I think on Ukraine the relationship seems as tight as ever. Downing Street won't say if Keir Starmer saw that text that went to the White House last night before it was sent, but I think we can read into President Zelensky's thanks that he sent to Keir Starmer for his support and his advice. And then, of course, there's the US, a relationship that has largely stayed trouble-free since Sir Keir Starmer's visit there last week. But I think you did see the Prime Minister starting to flex his diplomatic muscles a little bit today in response to apparent disparaging remarks that the Vice President, J.D. Vance, made about British troops. Ahead of Prime Minister's questions, he pointedly referred to British service personnel that had lost their lives in the last 2 decades. But again, this wasn't commenting, this was essentially pointedly referring to the facts. So this is a delicate diplomatic balancing act, but one I think that the government for now seem to be pulling off. But I think the question still hangs heavy. What about the long term? And today we had former UK ambassadors to the US seemingly lining up in a select committee here in Westminster to make remarks quite similar to what we've heard from the French president, that the special relationship is changing, that it is potentially being damaged by President Trump. So whilst Keir Starmer can operate under the surface for now, eventually he may have to emerge and make clear what the UK stands for in a rapidly changing world, perhaps more crucially, who it stands with.
Indeed so. Rob Powell updating us there from Whitehall. Thank you. Well, the White House has confirmed that the US has held negotiations with Hamas as the fragile ceasefire in Gaza continues to hold. The talks are ongoing, we're told, and are taking place in Doha, in Qatar. The US has a long-held policy of not negotiating with terrorists, which it is breaking with these talks. Hamas designated a foreign terrorist organisation by the US National Counterterrorism Centre. Well, speaking at a press conference earlier this evening, the White House press secretary said the US Special Envoy has the authority to negotiate with Hamas.
The special envoy who's engaged in those negotiations does have the authority to talk to anyone. Israel was consulted on this matter. And look, dialogue and talking to people around the world to do what's in the best interest of the American people is something that the president has proven is what he believes is good faith effort to do what's right for the American people. These are ongoing talks and discussions. I am not going to detail them here. There are American lives at stake. I would defer you to the Department of State for further details, but I'm not going to get into those talks here.
Well, despite that development, the president has had some strong words or stronger words for Hamas in the past half hour. Posting this message to Hamas on his Truth Social platform, he said, "Shalom Hamas," meaning hello and goodbye, you can choose, and threatening that they will be dead if they don't release the bodies of Israeli hostages. Well, as the UK and Europe attempt to win over Donald Trump on Ukraine, they and others are facing the negative economic impact of his decision to impose tariffs across the world. But there were signs that the Trump administration might be prepared to water down or delay measures in fear of the impact domestically, tonight granting a one-month exemption for US automakers on imports from Canada and Mexico. Nonetheless, the Canadian Foreign Minister tonight told a business audience that Canada could use oil and gas exports as a weapon if US tariffs escalate. Meanwhile, the introduction of tariffs has gone down badly in Beijing, with the country's foreign ministry saying that if the US wants a trade war or any other type of war, then China will fight until the end. Our Asia correspondent Nicole Johnston has more.
For thousands of Chinese Communist Party delegates, this is the political event of the year. For the rest of the world, it's a rare glimpse into the Great Hall of the People and into the impenetrable world of elite Chinese politics. At its helm, President Xi Jinping, dealing with problems at home and abroad. China is about to present its economic plan for the year ahead, but there are serious challenges. There's a property crisis. People aren't spending enough money here. And now China needs to factor in a trade war with the United States. Its response to US tariffs has been swift and strong. For 2 days in a row, it's put out this statement. If war is what the US wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end. After the session, a chance to try and grab the thoughts of the country's elite. What impact will the trade war have on China?
I think it'll have little impact on China because we treat others the way they treat us.
Our tech develops so fast. Just look at DeepSeek. Look at how fast our AI develops.
Far from the political capital, at the other end of the country in Guangzhou, a glassware exporter braces for the latest tariffs and hopes for the best.
I think the people will discuss this at the beginning, but yeah, of course, 10% is a huge number. You know, some profit even lower than this, but we cannot change it. Just get used to it and let it be.
However, it's not easy to let it be when old alliances are shifting and relationships crumbling. And in this new world, as China says, everything is changing fast. Nicole Johnston, Sky News, Beijing.
Well, the economic instability caused in part by Donald Trump's economic policies, including tariffs, are being felt not just in China, but here in the UK as well. And today, the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, admitted to MPs that the upheaval in the US could have an impact on inflation and on consumers.
How do we address these issues satisfactorily? We can't ignore them. The impact on inflation could be ambiguous, but the risks to the UK economy and to indeed the world economy are substantial at that point.
And that means for risks to people in England and Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland having less money in their pockets ultimately.
Well, yes, I mean that's right. We have to take well, this is what we're here for. We serve the people, and we have to take it very seriously.
Well, that will make difficult listening for the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, facing hard decisions and disappearing economic wriggle room ahead of her spring statement in 3 weeks' time. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates.
3 weeks today. The spring statement. Or is it the grim statement? The moment Rachel Reeves' own watchdog marks how she's doing against her borrowing target. And we find out how much she'll need to cut. Back in October, she set really tough borrowing targets so that from 2029, everyday government must be financed by taxes, not borrowing. Look, not achieved through this entire period. And then the plans only manage it by historically a tiny margin. And since January, as Ed Conway and me kept saying, things have got worse. The lines we were pointing to at in January showed borrowing going up and GDP growth disappointing, potentially wiping out that £9.9 billion of headroom, which would mean emergency cuts to get herself back on track. But here's a new thing. I've learned that she is going to have to take action if that £9.9 billion is squeezed at all. The Treasury doesn't think this margin for error can get any smaller. That means more cuts to public services and welfare. Look how tight planned Whitehall budgets already are. Public spending up from 2026 by a meagre 1.3%. And with some bits like health gobbling up more, that'll mean cuts in other areas. It's almost certain the Chancellor will need to squeeze future public spending further. Maybe as low as a 1% rise, the same plan by the last Tory government. What does that mean for this Labour's manifesto? Well, cabinet ministers tell me this means more promises junked. Some in government fear Rachel Reeves is being allowed to keep her pledge not to raise most taxes by making colleagues break theirs. This woman, well, she's having to change her plans. A month ago, the Work and Pensions Secretary, Liz Kendall, was not going to announce firm savings at the spring statement. Now, it seems she will, and a big row looms there. So number 10 and number 11 have a 4-point plan to get back on the front foot. New welfare proposals with expected changes to benefits. A big announcement on slimming down the civil service. Keir Starmer will make a show of tearing up some red tape regulations. And next week, Angela Rayner publishes her planning bill to get Britain building. This is the poppy strategy. Plant tall poppies to make sure that the tallest one, the bad news on borrowing, doesn't look too exposed. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves working in lockstep. But elsewhere in Whitehall, they're worried. Is the public ready for more pain and more U-turns?
Sam Coates there. Now detectives have named the 16-year-old boy shot dead in South London. He was Nathaniel Burrell, who was killed in broad daylight close to Stockwell Tube Station yesterday afternoon. No arrests have been made and police have deployed extra officers locally on reassurance patrols and are speaking to local schools. A child has died and another has been injured after a car was driven onto a sports pitch in Cumbria earlier today. Cumbria police say they were called just before 5 p.m. to reports of a collision involving a BMW and 2 children at Kendal Rugby Union Football Club. The police say the incident is not believed to be terror-related and a man aged in his 40s has been arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving. Catching up with the sport now, and Liverpool made it a hat-trick of wins for English clubs in the Champions League this week, with a memorable victory away to Paris Saint-Germain. Well, goalkeeper Alisson was the hero, producing a series of stunning saves as the French champions had 27 efforts, 10 on target. But Harvey Elliott snatched a late goal just 47 seconds after coming on. It gives Liverpool a 1-0 advantage to take into the second leg of their last 16 tie next Tuesday. Wrench yourself away from the football, Kevin. That was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we will take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers. In the press preview tonight, joined by the Daily Mirror's associate editor, who needs to be on a different channel, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor, Claire Ellicott. Welcome and lovely to see both of you. So among the stories, we'll be discussing this on the front page of the Metro, about our top story, the headline there, 60 more victims of serial spiking rapists. Back with that in just a moment.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, our top stories. A Chinese PhD student has been found guilty of drugging and raping 10 women in London and China. Police fear there could be more than 50 other victims. Kyiv has said a meeting between the US and Ukraine will take place in the near future after the US stopped intelligence sharing with Ukraine. And several £billion in spending cuts, including from the welfare budget, are expected in the spring statement later this month to help the Chancellor Rachel Reeves come within her borrowing limits. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kev Maguire, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor, Claire Ellicott. Lovely to see both of you.
See you.
As ever, plenty to discuss. So let's take a look straight away at the newspapers, starting with the Metro. The police search in the UK and in China for more possible victims of a student who drugged and raped 10 women and perhaps, the paper says, up to 60 others. That's their top story in the Metro. News of Donald Trump's latest ramping up of pressure on Ukraine leads the Telegraph with the headline, Trump turns off Ukraine missiles. The Guardian says the US stops sharing intelligence with Kyiv to pile pressure on Zelensky. The Times quotes a Ukrainian MP who says America's actions will only cost more lives in the war. The Eye goes with a bigger-than-expected £3 billion cut in the welfare budget to be announced in the Chancellor's spring statement. Claire's paper, the Daily Mail, has been looking into what it calls the fiasco of a two-tiered justice system, which is alleged to favour ethnic minorities. Expectations of a huge increase in German defence spending has raised hopes of an economic boost in the country and pushed up borrowing costs, according to the Financial Times. Kevin's paper, The Mirror, has Prince William's tribute and thanks to the heroes of the NHS on a visit to a hospital in Reading. And with some long-awaited sunshine finally on the horizon, the Star carries a warning from scientists to stay indoors or risk getting a tan. Well, Kevin and Claire are here with us. Should we start with the Metro, Claire? 60 more victims. I think it was 10 in the case that's been heard, possibly 50 more. But, I mean, you know, who knows? The police don't necessarily know, do they?
Yes, it sounds like they've found a cache of evidence that suggests there have been an awful lot of women. I think other papers are even saying up to 100. It's clear they have no idea how prolific he was, but if indeed he has carried out this many attacks, then you are looking at Britain's most prolific sex offender. And it's an awful case. They've identified a few victims, some of whom gave evidence. He put date rape drugs in those women's drinks, and then he attacked them. He's a PhD student who was living in London. It's just a horrific story, and you know, some of the jurors who sat through that trial are so traumatised by what happened. I think they've been spared jury duty for the next 2 decades. It's an absolutely heinous crime, and he may be one of Britain's worst offenders, and the police are, you know, still going through all the evidence that they've found, and there may be so many more women.
And he's been a student for a while, I think since 2017, you know, 1 degree, moving on to a PhD. Yeah. People would be looking and saying, why doesn't he just get deported?
I know.
He's been found guilty.
Yeah, he's 28. He's been in the UK for 10 years, initially Northern Ireland, then in London. They may attempt to do a deal. He hasn't been sentenced yet. We don't know quite how long the sentence is. It's going to be pretty hefty. Now, if he's committed these crimes in China, perhaps the Chinese want him after he's finished his term here. I'm sure he'll certainly be deported because he can't say he's got a family life here at that age to make an argument to stay. If he goes to China, I suspect he'd get another sentence. But perhaps there will be negotiations to go to China. Although, would he get the death penalty in China? If he would, then we don't deport. People might say, well, he should have thought that before he started raping these people, but we don't deport where there's the death penalty. But that figure of 60, I think that's incorrect, because the police were briefing 50.
Yeah.
I think the Metro, which goes to press very, very early, has added the 10 convictions to the suspected 50, although the Guardian goes for rape 100 women, but the police were briefing perhaps another 50, and so more people could come forward. He could yet find himself back on trial for fresh cases.
Yeah, and a very distressing job for police to sit through hours of footage trying to identify these people who have not been identified, and that's the really difficult part of this.
We often discuss whether police get it wrong, but it seems this has been a kind of very thorough investigation. There was an initial complaint, but then the woman withdrew it. Then the second woman came forward, and they seem to have pursued it and got over language barriers of having to get translations of 1,270 videos and 9 million messages, which is they had a bot to actually translate them for them. There's so many. I mean, I think the policing has been very good here.
Very interesting. OK, well, no doubt we'll hear more, because there's more to come in that. In the meantime, let's talk about Ukraine, the US, Europe. The Guardian, first of all, US stops sharing intelligence with Kyiv. And then the Daily Telegraph points out that that means it effectively turns off Ukraine's most powerful missiles, left frozen, as the paper puts it. I mean, how would you describe what this is then now by America?
Well, this is the latest development in this incredibly sad saga where you're seeing Trump force Ukraine to the negotiating table, and it's never going to be in Ukraine's interest. And the latest attempt to kind of put the pressure on is turning off the intelligence sharing. And this doesn't just mean that Ukraine can't attack Russia, it means Ukraine can't defend itself, and it won't be able to see incoming attacks from Russia and defend its people and its civilian population. And the only outcome of this can be that Russia is emboldened yet again to continue attacking Ukraine and do as much as it can while this peace process that Trump is allegedly trying to bring about continues. But it's so hard, I think, for us in Britain, who are so supportive of Ukraine, and of course Europe, to watch this happening, because there have been so many lies about what happened, and Trump has taken such a hard line against Zelensky, which I think none of us really understand.
Well, there's been an attack tonight, a missile strike by Russia. I think the latest I saw was 1 dead, 3 injured, an apartment building. And that is the accusation. You've left civilians open to be killed. And, if you look at the Telegraph, turned off the most powerful weapons. People pointing out, how will America sell these weapons to other countries in the future if they could suddenly pull the plug on a whim of foreign policy, effectively? I mean, it damages their own defence industry, does it not?
The Telegraph have a Ukrainian defence source describing it as blackmail. To force.
It's gun to the head leverage now, isn't it?
And if you look at the picture on the front of the Guardian, which is Trump punching his right fist after addressing both houses of Congress, you could stick in that hand a white flag that he wants Ukraine to wave, or you could put a fanboy poster of Putin in, because it's almost as if the US has switched sides and is now on Putin's side, not on Zelensky and Ukraine's side, from Trump ignorantly or mendaciously saying Zelensky was the dictator, not using that label on the actual dictator Putin, or blaming Ukraine for the invasion when they are the victim of the invasion. And he just seems now utterly determined to humiliate Zelensky, have him replaced eventually, and get him to beg. Yeah. And the problem, you're told a bully, stay away from a bully or fight back, but he can't, because the bully has basically got the weapon supplies in his grip.
I mean, the only hope is, the volte-face that happens quite quickly under the Trump administration. For example, under tariffs, chatting to automakers, as they call it, tonight, giving them a month's grace. I'm just seeing, actually, that NBC News is reporting that the Trump administration is rethinking their Guantanamo immigrant detention plan, which was another much-lauded policy that came in. So these things are paused. They can come and go. But, the effort to drive Zelensky to the table, it's a tough call, isn't it, this one? It's been toughly handled.
Of course, and you know, humiliating him in that White House exchange when J.D. Vance and Trump just roundly humiliated him, and then forcing him to apologise, and you know, it was just painful to watch. And we know Zelensky is such a proud man who's led his nation throughout this conflict, and actually, you know, has attracted respect from around the world for how he's handled these negotiations. It's just awful to watch it happen, and him having to go and bend a knee to Trump.
Well, the Times as well, more people will die after US cuts, as you quoted there, but also saying that Mike Waltz, the US National Security Advisor, said that President Trump was prepared to consider lifting the suspension of military aid to Ukraine if negotiations progressed.
There will be tensions in the Trump cabinet and government, and people will be viewing these things rather differently, and I suspect the military professionals who will report to the Defence Secretary and the National Security Advisor will be saying, look, this is utterly bonkers. Even if you want Ukraine to negotiate, well, Ukraine wants to negotiate, but it seems Trump wants to surrender and then pillage the natural resources. But if you weaken Ukraine in negotiations, you strengthen the hand of Putin. It's kind of crazy, but we are dealing with an unhinged president. That's it, who's nasty and vile with it, as is J.D. Vance.
Yes, well, the newspapers
he saw
have...
with a dig yesterday. I mean, it was just horrible.
In the meantime, I mentioned tariffs. You know, it's an interesting economic picture. In the meantime, you know, the idea of cuts to the welfare budget, which we've always thought would come about now, didn't we? We're now finding reasons why they're coming. So what's the latest that you're hearing then in terms of what would be trimmed?
So we're 3 weeks away from Rachel Reeves' spring statement, and she's going to have to propose some sort of cuts to government spending because she did have some headroom. It's been eroded by, she has about 10 billion of headroom. It's been eroded by the cost of borrowing going up, and she's going to have to find a lot of money. And all governments turn to the rather large welfare bill and come up with novel ways of trying to get it down. One of the ways I think they're going to try to get it down is by presenting the OBR, which is the fiscal watchdog, with proposals to try to get people back into work and to get the OBR to measure this financially and to sort of trim their outlook so that she's not spending as much. But obviously that's incredibly difficult. How on earth are the OBR going to
I thought Mel Stride took a whole 2 years doing that, didn't he? But anyway,
well, that's how difficult it is. Even if you have a goal to cut, it's very difficult to implement, and you cannot predict how many people are going to claim benefits. Now, there has been a spike in people suddenly being sick and getting benefits. Now, you've got to address that. If you can make them unsick, or class them as unsick.
And they get paid more on sickness benefit than on benefits where you have to seek work.
You could see that does need addressing in some way, but it's far easier to come out with these big figures and say you're going to do it than actually achieve it.
And that's, you know, Mel Stride did have some probably quite good proposals, and Labour have adopted them, it seems, and they will bear fruit possibly, but over the long term, and I think that's really difficult to take money off that she needs to find right now to increase defence spending on all the rest of it.
Or time to change the fiscal rules, I think.
And if people are sick, if people are sick and they are disabled,
they are.
Do you really want to? Do you want to penalise them? And there are so many people in work on low wages who rely on universal credit at the top of their wages. Do you really want to hurt them? I would hope not.
I think we'll watch this space for the next couple of weeks, won't we, on that one? Lots more still to come. The front page of The Telegraph as well. It says that when you go to the doctor, you are more likely to be seen by a woman. Back in just a moment.
Hear that whistle and that crunch. We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened
within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides. And it's moving this way.
Trust in politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong, and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. You know, it takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, like, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel like just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the two-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello? No, yes, where is it? I said, found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it, let me see it. This is brilliant, brilliant.
You are on Sky News. Welcome to the BAFTAs.
I'm Katie Spencer, Sky's arts and entertainment correspondent. And from the BAFTAs to the Brit Awards, the Oscars to the Olivier's, our entertainment team is here interviewing some of the biggest stars in the world.
This is the story of the night. It's the little independent film that could.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Up and scoop of the year. And then...
Well, welcome back. I just want to take a short moment to talk about us here at Sky News because we have just been voted News Channel of the Year for the 8th consecutive year of the Royal Television Society Award ceremony. Claire was cheering for my behalf. Here's a look then at the work that helped win that honour.
Here we go.
2, 1.
Sophie.
The big announcement.
The battle for number 10.
The drone is above us.
It is a chaotic scene.
They've asked us to leave.
It is a clear Labour landslide.
The car is covered in.
Liberated, but left in ruins.
A major incident has been declared.
That's when misinformation floods the zone.
It became clear the media weren't welcome.
These extraordinary images.
Must have taken years.
Who wants to talk about politics?
OK, stand by.
I wouldn't be asking it if I didn't think it was a relevant question.
The winner of the 2024 presidential election.
Quite extraordinary events.
Always reminds you what a busy year it was, doesn't it, when you look back at that? Anyway, I'm very proud of everybody here. So much hard work has to be going into 24-hour rolling news, live telly all the time.
As a viewer, I know why you win, and I flick through all the channels you can get in the news channels in the UK. I should probably be watching sport or something rather than going the news, but I'm watching the news.
We only watch Sky.
You're head and shoulders above.
And that's when they keep being invited back. Exactly that. Right, what are we doing next then? Two-tier justice fiasco. Let's go to your paper then, Claire.
Yes, so this is a really interesting story. So the Sentencing Council, which is independent of government, has decided to start deciding jail sentences based on people's characteristics, so whether they're ethnic minorities, whether they're from a different religion or a gender, and taking that into account when they sentence. This has now been brought to the attention of the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, who is not happy about it, but certain people, Robert Jimrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, are pointing out that some of her representatives were in the room when this was all decided. So it's a big row that will rumble on, but it's clearly quite a seismic thing to do, to take into account someone's background when you're deciding how to punish them for a crime they've committed. But
it's been going on for some time. You have the pre-sentencing reports, which you get from probation. The sentencing, I'm almost certain I have read this in the past. And they also look at your class, your economic positions, whether you've been abused, whether you're male or you're female, your ethnic background. And I know the Sentencing Council in the Bar Association and the others have been concerned that actually people from ethnic minority backgrounds, people of colour, are more likely to be, one, stopped by the police, two, prosecuted, three, jailed, and four, given a longer jail sentence. And they're trying to address that. But also it covers faith as well, if you're a religious group or a cultural group, rather than your heritage. I think Robert Jenrick, who's kicked off about this, will find that it's been going on when he was in government.
Well, I think these are new guidelines, but what they sort of feed into is this idea that there is a real problem in the justice system. They have too many people in prison, too many people are going to prison. We can't keep doing that. And you're going to have to find ways to either have fewer people in prison or lessen their sentences.
Just under a minute left. Daily Telegraph. When you go to the doctor, you're more likely to be seen by a woman. More female doctors than male for the first time.
Yeah.
All I'd point out is it says 50.04% of doctors are now female. But I mean, women are more than 50% of the population, so it's about right.
Yeah, I know. It's actually where it should be. But given there were no women doctors, or virtually no women doctors at the beginning of the last century, it's come forward. Although it does point out that women seem to be in paediatrics and GPs, fewer in surgery, as there's some imbalance in the higher earning positions, so there's a pay gap, but yeah, you would have thought George Clooney eat your heart out now, mate. You're not representing Dr. Finlay if you're old enough to remember that. You probably won't be, yeah.
Yeah, it's like another woo.
Sorry.
Both of you, thank you very much, Jean. Kevin, Claire, thank you. See you for more in the 11, of course. Let's take a look at the weather now, shall we?
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So it will be unsettled to end the week, but much milder, with 17 degrees Celsius possible in some eastern parts by the weekend. Before then, there'll be a mostly fine and largely fog and frost-free start tomorrow. Northern Scotland, though, will see some rain, windy in the north and the west again. Southern Britain will see any fog lifting by mid-morning. Northern Scotland will see rain largely clearing to Shetland. Most places will then be sunny into the afternoon. Ireland, Northern Ireland, expect a fair amount of cloud. It'll be quite warm, but windy.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
So coming up next on Sky News at 11, police believe a Chinese PhD student found guilty today of drugging and raping 10 women in London and China could have raped more than 50 others.